Okay, y'all. So yeah, I'm just kind of waiting for everybody to settle in. Make sure you have your chat open, everyone, so we can stay active, stay connected. Just a quick reminder that if you want your extra credit point, you got to have your camera on the whole time so we can see your beautiful faces. Okay. Um, just to encourage you to connect in the best way that we can. Good afternoon. Okay, y'all. So let me walk you through what today's session is going to be like. Okay, so we do have another guest speaker who will be with us for about 20 minutes, give or take. We'll see how it goes, and then we'll use the rest of the time to review our Koyol Shauki papers from last time. You're welcome to take notes on our guest speaker for today. Take notes on that. You don't have to write a Koyol Shauki paper for that because it's not already calendared into the system and the syllabus. But please feel free to take notes so that we can add it to the conversation that we're going to have afterwards and connect it to possibly Monday's session. Okay, so just a heads up, but you're in for a real treat, everyone. You're in for a real treat. So I'm really excited to introduce our next guest speaker. How are you doing, Jessa? Can you hear us? You're good?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you and we can see you. Our last speaker, we had some technical issues, so it's good to know we're on board here. So let me formally introduce you, okay? So Jessa Calderon is a Tongva and Chumash songwriter, poet, hip hop artist, performer, hypnotherapist, massage therapist, energy worker, and does guided meditation. So she's all about healing, y'all. It's beautiful. Jessa encourages our community and youth to find their healing mentally, physically, and spiritually through her words, music, and practices. Jessa has worked with community and youth from many nations, helping them find themselves while helping them to feel good about themselves. So thank you for being here with us, sis. Thank you for sharing the space with us. I'm going to go ahead and invite you to speak a little bit more on that bio, right? Like all the practices that you're involved in, why you're involved in them, and how did that come to be in your life? Why did you find that to be a necessity?
Okay, mi hija, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Vero, for having me on today. So the way that all came about for me, it started at about the age of 7 years old. And I began meditating at the age of 7 because of what one of my relatives was showing me how to do, how to sit in silence. And, we didn't exactly call it meditating, but sitting in silence and internalizing, breathing in and focusing on your breaths, and then, asking questions that you might have, or just sitting silently and tuning into yourself. And the teachings came through that of how, we are spiritual beings in a temporary physical body. And so I was at the age of 7 able to identify with myself in that way. And at the age of 8, I was making contact, so to speak, with my highest spirit, with myself. And at the age of 8, I was listening to myself, my spiritual self tell me that I was here to be a massage therapist and to be an entertainer. And when these words were being told to me of what I was here to do, the understanding came strong. I knew how to touch people and help their bodies to feel better. I understood energy work. Like it was information that just came through. It's like you can't necessarily express it with words. You feel it with feeling. And so that is how the process began for me. And I was also at the same time writing, and it began kind of like poetry. It would just flow out of me, and I just knew how to do it. So I recall being about 10 and telling one of my aunties, yeah, I'm going to be a massage therapist. And she laughed at me, and she was like, yeah, and I'm sure next week you'll want to be a, ice cream truck driver. And I got really mad and I told her, get on the floor. And she looked at me like, what? And I said, get on the floor. So we were up in a cabin. And so I had to get on the floor, and I popped her back. I cracked her back, and then I cleared her energy. And then I released tension in her neck. And then I told her to get up. And I was real serious, and she was just like, oh my gosh, baby girl, if that's what you want to do when you grow up, I support you all the way. So these kinds of things would just fall into place for me, through, and don't get me wrong, I grew up in the barrio, I grew up in the hood, and with all of the bad things that happened to me and around me, I found myself in dark places at times. I found myself doing things that otherwise I maybe shouldn't have done. But every time I sat alone in silence and I connected back with myself, I remembered again why I was here and what I needed to do. And it gets like that, in your daily life in this westernized world, and the wrongs that they're teaching us that they think are right. We tend to disconnect from ourselves, from the earth, from each other. But when we sit in silence, that's the time when it tends to remind us, who we are, and our purpose here, because we all do have purpose here, whether we understand that or not. So yeah, that's the little spiel on that, on how that came to be.
Beautiful, thank you. And I want to remind everyone, right, that just like Jessa was sharing, we get so caught up in the day-to-day modern life that we forget to silence all of these modern distractions, just silence everything and just be with yourself and listen to your inner self, right? Because we carry so much wisdom. We carry the wisdom and the experiences of our ancestors, right? And we don't know how to listen to our ancestors, to those voices anymore, because we're just caught up in the busyness of this very modern life. So I'm so thankful, Jessa, that you were able to know how to do that so early on in your life, right? And how that has played out in your life in so many ways, right? Where now you're just, everything that you do is centered on listening to that, meditating and listening to that, so that you're in the right space to be able to heal, and all of these different things that you do and all the different ways that you do it. So I want to talk a little bit about how you came to, you said that you grew up in the barrio, and that, like a lot of us, like myself, not really loving myself, my own experience, because I didn't know my identity, I didn't know my worth, right? And that got me into trouble. And so I want you to speak a little bit more about that, and how your identity played a role in either taking you out of that or reminding you who you were. And I also like how you said, I remembered, because we talked in this class before about the Koyol Shauki pedagogy, about remembering who we are, right? Putting those pieces back together. So if you want to speak on that a little.
Yeah, you know what? It's very common for all of us growing up that something will happen, will trigger us to cause us to not honor ourselves, to not love ourselves, to not know our worth. And it happens to us all differently. Some of us, it happens with molestation and what the predator tells us, right? The predator will tell you, if you speak up, if you tell somebody, that they're going to hate you, they're going to think you're disgusting. Others, it happens with either that and or going to school and being told by white teachers that there's something wrong with you, or or by other students, shaming you for the way that you look, and how you see certain people are held on a pedestal for their looks, and you look nothing like them. You're probably darker skinned, right? Like there's different things that lead up to that feeling of lacking your self-love and your self-worth. And what it comes down to ultimately is understanding that a lot of these European standards are what our focus are causing us to focus on what is beautiful and what is not beautiful, instead of realizing that what we hold internally is more beautiful than anything. Because how many times have you seen like a supermodel person who had the ugliest spirit and treated everybody like trash, and it's disgusting to see that. But ultimately, just knowing that it has nothing to do with how you look, it has to do with how you feel. How do you feel about yourself? And so I didn't have the problem of disconnect with my culture. I understood that I was Native. I did have the understanding, though, that we had to hide a lot. My grandparents, they had to hide a lot of who they were. Because even, it was, with the Spanish invasion, they had to lose their language. They had to leave their religious beliefs behind. They had to leave, a lot of things, including their children. Like parents and children were separated at that time of the mission system. And that caused a lot of trauma, and then came the Mexico period, for like 27 years, this was Mexico. And even traumas were happening to our people from them too. There was, sex traffic and things like that that were still happening. And there was a lot of trauma in those days. And that is the time when my relatives started claiming Mexican. They started saying they were Mexican, and it was a means of survival to fit in because we looked the same. So it was a means of survival. And also when America took over, causing more trauma with, broken treaties and massacres and things like that. Still, they found themselves claiming to be Mexican because in the time of that era, if you were California native, you were instantly dead. So, it was all these traumas that occurred, and whether you were from California or whether you're from Mexico or whether you're from South America, these kinds of traumas that I'm talking of because they happen to all of us. So that's called genetic trauma. And that plays a part in our lack of self-love too, because these kinds of memories get pushed down in through our DNA. But also, besides the DNA, it's the way that our loved ones react to their children, right? So you've got generations of children growing into adults with lack of love from their parents, because when they were taken into these mission systems, the missions weren't loving them, they were torturing them. So you've got generations of people who didn't know how to love. And now you've got our generation, and we're trying to find our way through that, So we're taking on everybody's trauma, including ours in this generation. But the beautiful thing is that many of us are coming to terms to understanding it. And once you understand it, it's about accepting it. Whatever these traumas are, it's about accepting it. And not to say I'm a victim, but understanding that, what, this ends here with me. And I'm going to choose to heal the generational trauma. I'm going to choose to heal the traumas that I faced as a child, or the abusive relationship that I was in, and the way people were, abusing me mentally, physically, spiritually, sexually. I choose to say I'm not a victim. There are no chains attaching to me. I clear that energy, and I look inside, and I choose to say that I'm beautiful no matter what I faced. I'm beautiful no matter what anybody told me. I love myself for who I am. And if other people can't love me for who I am and accept me for who I am, then I have to be strong enough to cut ties with them and let them go. Because I am on this journey of experience, of learning, and all of that ties into learning about self-love, about self-healing, and understanding that because of the traumas that have occurred in past tense before we were here, many of us don't have our accurate history or complete language, complete understandings of religious ceremonies. And we shouldn't hate ourselves for that. It comes back to, I understand what happened here before me. I understand all of that. And then in this moment, here forward, I'm going to sit with my community and figure out how we can move forward in a good way. But definitely once we realize that we are not victims of our circumstance, but rather we are spiritual beings in experience, that is when it becomes easier for us to love ourselves and to find our healing.
Beautiful. So I was also, I was just going to write in the chat, but I'm going to go ahead and speak to it. So you made me remember about, the fact that even though we carry intergenerational trauma, and for those of you that don't know, this is something that has been proven by science, right? That intergenerational trauma gets imprinted into our DNA. Okay, so from the day we're born, we already have the trauma of our ancestors imprinted in our DNA. Okay, so that's been scientifically proven. But because we know that we can carry the experiences of our ancestors in our DNA, it's not just the trauma that we carry, it's also the resistance, the resilience, the ability to heal, the ability to move forward. So don't forget that. And just like Jessa's saying, it's not about victimization, but about a recognition that this is what happened and this is what I carry in my DNA. I have to come to terms with it while also remembering that I have the ability to heal. And when you heal yourself, you're healing past generations too.
Yeah.
And then you're healing the generations yet to come. And that's so powerful. That is extremely powerful. But we can't do that if we're so caught up in the craziness of modern life and technology, and just like we're running like 100 miles an hour, right, from one thing to another, constantly, and we're being bombarded by messaging constantly, right? Like the first thing we look at when we wake up is our phone. The last thing we look at is our phone. And what are we doing in between? We're on some kind of gadget. We're on some kind of something, right? And so when do we take the time on a daily basis to just unplug from all of that, be in the moment, take those breaths, remember that you're a human being alive in this moment, right? With all these other natural elements around you. Appreciate the wind, the sunshine, the rain, the grass, the bees, appreciating all of that and how you're part of that, and just taking time to really listen and reflect so that you can heal. If you don't do that, then how are you going to heal? And in the meanwhile, you're continuing to be bombarded with everything, right? And it just gets heavier and heavier and heavier. So take time to do that for yourselves. Please take time to do that for yourselves. And part of the process of writing your paper, because it is called the Koyoshaki reflection paper, is really to give you the opportunity to dig deeper into your thought process, right? And really think about, what am I learning, and how does that apply to me? How does it apply to the ancestors who came before me? And what can I do about that now so that it can have a positive impact on the generations yet to come? So the paper's not a paper just so you can fill in the boxes. It's to give you the time that you need to go through that process of reflection, right? And to dig deeper in yourself, to find those voices that are muffled with technology, right? So I want to bring it to the next thing and talk about your music. Let's get to your music, because we must share your talents. We must share your talents. So talk to us a little bit about how that came to be for you, and then we can share a couple of your videos.
Okay. Well, taking it back to like knowing at 8 years old that I was going to be doing like the healing work, right? I knew I was going to be doing the entertainment. And so it started then when I was like writing poetry. But fast forward to I was 12 years old, and my brother was standing in a circle with all his friends, and they were rapping. And, they had like the ciphers. And so I remember listening to all of them and thinking like, well, he sucks. That was okay. He sucks. I'm like, man, that's so easy. I could do that. And so I just kind of like sat there thinking about, if I did it, what would I say? And then I stood in between two guys. So it kind of came down the circle. And then it was like, I'm in between these two guys. This guy just went, now it's my turn. So I just started flowing. And all these guys just turned around, because I was really quiet back then. They used to call me silent. And so to hear this quiet person just turn around and just start busting out, everybody was like, what? And so, of course, they came up and gave me my props after. And that's when I realized, I think that's for me. I think I was supposed to be doing it. So I kind of turned into like hip hop, where it was like I would sing my hooks and I would rap my verses. And when I was 16, I recorded my first song in the garage, and, was working with my brother and like the guys on the block. And then at 18, started working with some guys in the barrio, in like some ghetto studios or whatever. And at the age of 22, my brother passed away, and I had stepped away from 20 to 22 from the music. And when he passed away, I knew for myself, I was like, okay, the music's done for me completely. I'm done, but also at the age of 22, I would find out that I was pregnant. So I would have my baby the following year. My brother passed away 9/11/2009. and my son was born 9/30/2010. And so so they never physically met, but they spiritually met, and so 2 years later, after my son was born, he was the one that said, "Mom, you have to go back to the studio," at 2 years old. And
Oh,
I said, "No, baby, it's not for me. Mommy's done. I don't feel it in my heart anymore." And, he was very insistent. "No, Mom, you have to go to the studio." So it just turned into like hey, let's just go for fun. I'll show you what the studio's like. So I went to the studio and I took him, and like we just messed around. And of course, I put it on Facebook, and native man who runs a magazine out in New Mexico messaged me, and he just kind of like, I felt cornered, but then I just started thinking, like, I think this is all happening for a reason, because he was just kind of like, when is your album dropping and all this and that. And like, he wanted to write a whole write up on me. And I was like, no, 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 I'm not. And he's like, no, yes, you are. And so it just kind of like happened. It just kind of fell in place. And so I would record my first album, which, I admit, I don't think it was the best work. I love my writing. My writing has always been full of passion, but the expression died when my brother died, if you get what I mean, like the fire fizzled out. But then something really interesting happened where this Mexican rapper, he asked me to write a song for him. And he gave me like this very norteño hip hop kind of a beat. And I was like, okay, I could do this. And so that's when I wrote that hook. "I didn't cross the border crossed me. Can't call my folks illegal if yours came across the sea." And I wrote a song for him. And when I showed up to him, and I was loving it, I was like, man, this song's hard. I showed up to his house was empty. His phone was disconnected. Like he just vanished into thin air, you know? And I remembered, like, I got on the phone with some young kid that I had recently met who made beats. And I was like, "Do you have a beat for this? Because this song needs to be heard." And he was like, "Yeah, come over." So I rewrote some of the verses to kind of fit like me, you know, and my reflection versus his reflection. And then I loved the hook. Like I wanted all of it to kind of represent, the connectiveness of how the border is colonial. Whether you're talking about the Mexican border or the Canadian border, it's very colonial, and that we are all connected. And like for you as a white person to turn around and tell a person from Mexico that they're illegal because of your colonial border, when you crossed an entire ocean, homie, you're tripping. Like that doesn't make sense in my mind. How does it make sense in theirs, So I was just so passionate about that when I went into the studio, I recorded that song, and it was like my fire came back, and I really wanted to do music again. So it wasn't the first album that even did it for me. It was my first official single that I released, which was "Home of the Brave. And that's when I realized I do still want to do music. I do still love it.
Is "Home of the Brave" the same song that you're talking about crossing the border?
Yes, "Home of the Brave" is that one. And so it says, it goes, "Home of the brave, not land of the free. Crooked cops on my street steady harassing my peeps. Columbus didn't discover Isht, he was lost at sea. Therefore my folks discovered him. There were no borders when the Santa Maria came ashore. What gives immigrants the right to tell the indigenous you can't be here no more? That's hypocrisy at its finest. I pray they'll see in America's ugliest colors. No, that doesn't define us indigenous people, because we too had a taste, had our culture stripped and traditions taken away. Some folks make religion far too tremendous, keep taking it to war. Religion will end us. That's not a promise or a threat. The way that we treat this world, that's simply something we can expect. If we keep moving this way, we're guaranteed regret. And I didn't cross the border crossed me. Can't call my folks illegal if yours came across the sea."
Beautiful, beautiful. All right. Is that one of the videos that you want to show, or did you have another one in mind?
No, because you wanted to show injustice. So I
Yes.
could actually finish off that song if you want to hear it with the second and third verse.
How do you all feel about that? Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay. So it goes, Times haven't changed. Fools like Trump want to make the indigenous go away. Illegal is the term being used freely. Know the bloodline of your family, because Europe isn't close. I'll walk across that Mexican border. For your land, I'll need a plane or boat. The doctrine of discovery gives the right to steal, kill, and harm. I can't fathom rape came from the word of God. Man has an urge for profit, greed, and power. Once the land's in their hands, they begin to devour. Everything is poison, from water, food to our minds. They manipulate, and you don't see it as a crime. Open your eyes, realize nothing they do benefits you. Illness stems from the modified foods and will inhale disease with the air that we breathe. When Earth's used up, we can't just leave. Said I didn't cross the border crossed me. Can't call my folks illegal if yours came across the sea. I didn't cross the border crossed me. Can't call my folks illegal if yours came across the sea. Said I didn't cross the border crossed me. Can't call my folks illegal if yours came across the sea. 2020 something still breeds stupidity. As much as we've advanced, we took 1,000 steps back. And it's the future of our children hurting as these gases keep burning. So many lives die at the hands of oil companies' corruption. Oil they steal, oil they spill, then turn around like it ain't nothing. The Cree said you cannot eat money. My question to you, what will you do when you destroy the water and land so bad? There's no water and food. Will you turn to your Bible and pray, or heal the destruction and hate? Our actions determine our fate. Let us love and respect our Mother Earth before it's too late. That's the least we could do. How can you kill the one who's loved you from the womb? How can you kill the one who's loved you from the womb? Said I didn't cross the border crossed me. Can't call my folks illegal if yours came across the sea. No, I didn't cross the border crossed me. Can't call my folks illegal if yours came across the sea. Said I didn't cross the border crossed me. Can't call my folks illegal if yours came across the sea. So if y'all want to see the music video for that, it's Home of the Brave by Jessa Calderon, and you can watch it.
All right. I'm going to put that in the chat.
Yeah, you know, and speaking of the oil spill, there was a oil spill yesterday that happened in California. So it's just like, come on, you guys, when are we going to get with it?
For real, I hadn't even heard about that. It's crazy. I mean, I've been like super busy, but I gotta catch up on that for sure. Yeah,
Well,
like
nobody's really talking about it online. That's the problem. Like I work with a community of Native women called Sacred Places Institute, and we go around trying to prevent these kinds of things from happening by saying this needs to stop, you know? So because I'm in that world, that's where I learned about it.
got you. Gus, go ahead and unmute. Ask your question.
No, I saw that on Twitter. I'm pretty sure it's San Francisco, right? Like Bay.
I think maybe your
Yes,
Wi-Fi is
can
kind
hear
of
me?
shaky because your voice is like dragging like a robot.
Yeah.
I think what he's trying, I'm sorry, Gus. I'll go ahead and ask for you since you wrote it in the chat, because it's hard to tell what you're saying. He's asking if it was the one near San Francisco.
Yes, it was.
All right. I want to, if it's okay with you, Jess, if I go ahead and play the video in Justice, is that cool? But
Yeah.
before I do that, maybe you can explain to the students how the idea of the video came to be. Like, why did you decide to do it in that way?
Okay. So earlier, how I said that at some point for 27 years, this was Mexico, right? What happened was when America took over, America made Mexican people feel really disgusting and shameful about themselves, and calling them immigrants and continuously taking them back across the border. And like, it was just this ugliness. And so, you know, around the time of the Chicano movement, there was a meeting that happened amongst the Chicano movement, and they discussed the Mexican map of 1821. And when they discussed that, they brought the story of Aslan, which is a original story, and they changed it and manipulated it to say, see, this story says that we come from here. This is our land. So you can't tell us to go back to Mexico because this is our land. But what happened was that was an erasure story on my people. And so and also remember I said that my relatives were claiming to be Mexican at some point for survival. So the mind, the same way when you think of the colonial border, you think of immigrants over there and da 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 da. Well, when people think of California and Los Angeles, they think of Mexicans. And that's cool. I'm not shaming that, but I had to represent that, hey, despite what people have said of erasure stories, whether it came from Europeans or Mexicanos, we have to keep in mind that there is more to the stories here. And we have to start learning and unraveling the truths. And so the truth is that my ancestors were here before the Mexico period, before the Spanish period, from the beginning of time, right? And so, you know, and my Chumash relatives and my Kumeyaay relatives, and I mean, on, we were all here. And so with this song, I talk about how, you know, it wouldn't, like I took Tupac's verse, it wouldn't be LA without Mexicans. And then I added to it, but yo, it wouldn't be LA without Tongva land. Know where you're at, right? And so I'm telling people to think about whose land you're on and honor that, right? But then I also brought you, Vero, and other Mexica people in the mix to show the unity of where we stand today for those of us who do honor each other, because you yourself, Vero, do honor my Chumash relatives and my Tongva relatives. You know, you're a good relative. And so I wanted to show that connection of good relativeness, if you will, in that video, you know, to say it's what happened, but now we need to unify and we need to speak up for each other, right? Which is why I did Home of the Brave. And we need to stand together from this point forward, or we're going to keep screwing ourselves and getting screwed by the Europeans, you know? And so we need each other at this point to stand strong together and to mend the healing, right? Have uncomfortable conversations and fight the fight together. And so I also wanted to let the rest of the world know that Indigenous peoples, all Indigenous peoples, you know, we are the most invisible people on this planet. Like when you think of America, you think of Black people, do you think of white people? You know, what Black people go through may not be all good, but you've got a lot of famous Black people on TV and radio. And where are the Native people? Where are the Indigenous people, right? And the missing and murdered women and children and you know, men, I incorporate that at the third verse. And the third verse, I did it more like poetry, you know. But I talk about the people who have been incarcerated wrongfully, people who have died at the hands of FBI and police brutality wrongfully, and nobody's talking about this stuff, right? So I wanted to talk about the injustices of all of our peoples. And so I started with the Tongva people and moved my way over to other Indigenous peoples as I went about it. So I'm sorry that was long, but that's what it was.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Thank you. And then Joanna, that's an interesting point that you made there about blackwashing our history as well. So I'm gonna ask you to speak on that a little bit, Joanna, but I do want to speak to what you shared, Jessa, because, you know, in our last couple of sessions, you know, I did talk about Aslan and all that with my students, because it's a Chicano studies class, right? It's like
Right.
they go hand in hand, and I'm a very proud Chicana, right? And I do believe in the concept of Aslan as far as Indigenous peoples migrating before the colonial borders and sharing culture and language and etc. And when we looked at the linguistic maps, we see where the Nahuatl rooted or the Uto-Aztecan languages exist even today, right? So that's evidence of how we shared and migrated and lived in these areas together for a long, long time. And but I understand like the conflict, right? In that idea, the idea of Aslan, the way that it was proposed during the 60s and 70s, right?
Right.
And I try to make sense of it. And I invited Jessa here because like I've told you all before, you all need to hear different perspectives, right? And you need to come to your own conclusion. And it's important to hear different perspectives so you get a more well-rounded story, right? So that we're not erasing each other.
Right.
So it's good to have these conversations, right? And I think that sometimes it's difficult to have these courageous and uncomfortable conversations, you know. And I put myself in the shoes of like white folks and how it must feel to hear this information and how uncomfortable that is. And then now I kind of feel like a bit of that, right, when we have these conversations of Aslan and how that concept of Aslan was so damaging to the original indigenous peoples of this area, right? So that kind of like gives me a little taste of that. But I have to make sure that I check myself, and instead of getting like all offended and defensive and like, oh, how dare you, you know what I mean? It's about let me understand where you're coming from, right? Because your story and your perception is just as valid as mine, right? So let's understand, let's come to a place where we can understand each other. And I've tried to make sense of that in my own way. And what the conclusion that I've come to, and I'm not saying that this is right or wrong, this is just what has made sense in my head, because I've studied Chicana, Chicano history for decades, you know, that's my field of expertise, right? So I know the history very well. And I felt like during the 60s and 70s, you know, those that paved the way for the rest of us, that they were really trying to find some kind of identity, some kind of validation of belonging, right? That's what they came up with. And because there is evidence that our ancestors existed here long ago. Where exactly, we don't know, right? But there's those stories of migrations that are deeply rooted in the founding of Tenochtitlan, and how the Mexica arrived there from somewhere in the north. You know, they weren't always there, they migrated there, right? So they came from somewhere. So it was all those stories. And because all indigenous peoples and Chicanas and Chicanos histories are so fragmented, we're trying to grasp for whatever we can to put the pieces together and try our best to make sense of it, right? And I think that since the 60s and 70s, we've learned a lot, right? So I feel like the concept of Aslan is kind of stuck in the definition of the 60s and 70s, and we have to help evolve what that means for us today. Right? What does that mean for us today? I think that back then we didn't realize as a people, right? Because nobody's getting educated on this stuff, y'all. Nobody's getting educated about the history of the original peoples of these areas. What did the Tongva go through? What did the Chumash go through? What did the Taviam go through? Nobody had that information, right? Because it's not being taught. It still isn't being taught. Even indigenous peoples themselves don't even have all that information. They're trying to piece it together themselves. So because of that lack of information, I wonder if the Chicanos of the 60s and 70s just didn't have enough information to be able to create this identity without harming and erasing others. I feel like in their minds, they weren't erasing others on purposely because they didn't know of the others yet. They
Well,
didn't
and
really
that's
know.
the thing. The others, Tongva, some Chumash, they were part of that movement too.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I don't think it was intended to be harmful, but it was harmful, you know. And if you think about the language, how they call it Euro-Aztecian, what they're doing is pulling root words. The language isn't identical. It's root words that are connected. But there's also the Hokan language, which is the Chumash, you know, the Kumeyaay. And so those are not Euro-Aztecian.
No.
Those are their own language. And in Mexico, there's languages that are their own too that are not Euro-Aztecian. So it's really important to know that, you know, are we all related? Sure, we're all related, because we say we're all related because energetically we're all related, and we shouldn't be disconnected with this whole race card, you know. But I do think like these conversations are really good, because in the future, I think the information that our children are going to have are going to be more potent and stronger information, you know. And the more that we connect with each other, I feel the answers will come. You know, a lot of people do talk about the connection between, I believe it's people in Arizona that had migrated, and they believe that's the people of Mexico. So there's a lot more information that will be found out the more that as Indigenous people we connect and tell our stories and go, oh wait, I think that's the missing puzzle piece, you know. It will happen.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I choose to believe in my heart it wasn't intentional to erase us, but we have to acknowledge what we know from this point.
Most definitely. And I think that also like it's more of a recent thing where more and more people are doing land acknowledgements, right? It's like, okay,
Mhm.
let's acknowledge the original people of this land. That's like a more recent thing for like widespread peoples. The way that I've learned on this journey for a couple of decades now, ever since I became a traditional Aztec dancer, was I was always taught by my elders to do that. I was always taught for decades ago to do that. Like, this is the land that you're on. These are the people, the original, caretakers of these lands. We pay respect to them. And then not only that, but you go and you build relationships with them, and you ask for permission to be able to practice your own indigenous culture on their homeland, because it's like you're going into somebody else's home, right? And you can't just walk into somebody's home and do whatever you want. You got to knock on the door first and introduce yourself and establish a relationship and say, hey, this is the real me and this is what I'm about. Is it cool if we share this space? Is it cool if I practice these traditions here and share in ceremony with you? And those things are so important. And that's why Jessa and so many other people, and they say like, oh yeah, Vero knows what's up, like she's cool, we're all cool, like we all share in this, and there's this cultural exchange, and there's this building of family amongst us, right? And this mutual respect for one another. But if we don't take those steps, then it causes more turmoil, right? And it prolongs the healing and the recognition of what did happen. And at the end of the day, we were all trying to figure out, how do we get through these very traumatic eras in time and dealing with colonization? You know what I mean? Because we can't be pitted against each other when we have the same enemy of white supremacy and systemic racism and colonialism. At the end of the day, we're all dealing with that, right? So we need to focus our energy in coming together and understanding that we share in those dilemmas, and how do we move forward to dismantle those injustices, right? So we can all live a better life together, and seeing each other, truly seeing each other for who we are and honoring who we are. I want to pass palabra real quick to Joanna. You want to talk about the blackwashing real quick?
Um, well, I'm just saying that our history is blackwash because I was taking a sociology class back at PCC, and they would tell us that we come from Black people. I don't think I come from Black people. I think I come from Native American people. So I don't know.
Well, were they saying that, like, for
That
example,
we all come from Black people. I don't think I come from Black people.
do you mean, are they talking about how the original, like the first humans on planet Earth were
Yeah.
Black, and then everyone
No.
traveled and evolved? Or there's the other theory where, like, for example, the Olmec, the big Olmec heads were actually African. Like, is that what they were referring
I
to?
think, yeah, that one.
Okay.
The heads, but I don't think I don't know.
Yeah, so
No,
there's that theory out there too, right?
The
Where
Moors, they call themselves the Moors, ¿verdad? And
yeah, that the Moors are
I kind of used that, like that idea of Aslan, how it was erasure, right? In the Chicano story, in the Chicano movement story. The Moors, I identify it that way too, is because it's sad, it's crazy, but like, because these written stories are in books in universities, it makes it true, but it's not true, and I think the Moors have done a lot of that erasure story too, because the Moors are from the other side of the world, but as long as they have it in a textbook, then it makes it right, and that's not cool. So I think it's really important, and I'm grateful to the Black community that knows what's up, and they identify and they stand, with the strong words to say, no, this is Native territory. I kind of see it as kind of the same thing as the Aslan thing, and it's really, really important that that we try our best to know and learn the truth, but at the end of the day, not to hate anybody for what has been said and what has been done, and just try to understand that at the end of the day, we are all human beings in an experience, in a body for experience. After this, when I die, I go back to spirit form real quick, and guess what? I'm back to consciousness, and me and Beto are going to be the same being, and whoever else passes and joins us, we're all the same. You know, so I feel that even though it's important to speak our truth, that we shouldn't get too hung up and angry over these stories as they're occurring, you know, as we try to identify what the truth is.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, everyone's going to choose what they want to believe, right? So, you know, do I believe in the evolution of humanity beginning in Africa? I think I do believe that. I believe that. Do I believe that um, the Olmecas were black? I, I have a hard time believing that. You know, I do. That's my personal opinion, though. There are other people who think the opposite of me, and that's okay. You can have your opinion, you know, but just know that if you're going to have that opinion and you're going to publish it and you're going to try to push it, you also have to be cognizant of how that might be hurting groups of people, right?
Mhm.
Just like Jessa and Jessica is explaining, right? So we gotta you know, just be mindful of those things, right? Okay, y'all. So I'm gonna go ahead and play this video that I want to share with you. Let me make sure I have the right screen open so that you can see the visuals behind it and the unity in it. And I was just really honored, you know, when Jess invited myself and some like, it was such an awesome group of people, and it was like diverse, representing different, you know, indigenous groups. It was beautiful, and so to see that unity come together, it was dope. It was a dope experience, and I love the video. But you know, you'll see me in there. You'll see my comadre, who we've danced together, Magdalena, for decades. You know, we started dancing forever, and then we both had our baby girls at the same time. And I'm her daughter's Nina, and she's my daughter's Nina. So our daughters are in that as well. In addition to, you know, other friends and relatives that are there. So we're gonna go ahead and play that video for you, and then we'll open it up for questions. Okay. Oh, wait. Let's see. There we go. Hear that okay?
It wouldn't be LA without Mexicans, but yo,
Let me,
Tongva land, know where you're at, show.
I'm gonna start that again.
It wouldn't be LA without Mexicans, but yo, it wouldn't be LA without Tongva land, know where you're at, show respect to the tribe whose lands on which you stand. Shout out my relatives, showing pride with no tribal ID. We're erased through paperwork and false history. Attempts to erase the ancestors were done so violently, it's been expressed. Americans will become the new Native American. This prophecy comes to fruition as Michigan, all wrong, marching with torches while bitching about their history being revoked. Now where have I heard that story before? They got the cops on their side as they act in hate and violence. When it's natives in prayer, cops shooting, mace yelling, remain silent. America intended for their laws to be one-sided. Tears rolling down my cheeks as we endure injustice in these streets. The privileged don't know our pain as they take and voice their ways. Tears rolling down my cheeks as we endure injustice in these streets. The privileged don't know our pain as they take and voice their ways. Try to remove our voices, children of rights, then wonder why we resist. On our own land, it's a struggle to exist. We get ignored, disrespected, and dismissed. Riots from blacks for similar discrepancies against the perpetrators. They tell us all to go back to somewhere, failing to acknowledge they're the invaders. Their schools fail to teach us our truth and pride, so it's on us to keep our truth alive. Gaining our pride back in these last few decades, after our grandparents were cornered into self-hatred. Our children's children will never forget about broken treaties and broken promises. They take our land and give us land and take it away, yet an Indian giver is what we're named. Dead silent, we will never remain. Tears rolling down my cheeks as we endure injustice in these streets. The privileged don't know our pain as they take and voice their ways. Tears rolling down my cheeks as we endure injustice in these streets. The privileged don't know our pain as they take and voice their ways. Fear and atrocious corporal punishment is how the European immigrants made examples of us since the 1400s. And if you think it's a thing of the past, think again. From Leonard Peltier, Orlando Watley, to Red Fawn, the system is still finding ways to falsify cases to imprison as well as murder our people. Let us never forget John Trudell's wife, children, and mother-in-law, who were burned to death in a suspicious house fire which was never investigated. John T. Williams, a woodcarver who was walking down the street carving a piece of wood, was shot 4 times by Seattle's police officer Burke. Alan Locke shot 5 times by Officer Mayrose in Rapid City. Neil Stonechild, Rodney Nastis, and Lawrence Wegner, who were individually abandoned in the outskirts of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada by Saskatoon police and left to freeze to death. Renee Davis, who was contemplating suicide, held an empty gun in one hand and a magazine clip in the other. Paul Castaway, who held a knife to his own neck. Both shown signs of depression and clearly needed help. Both shot to death by police. L'Oreal Barnell, who was shot 5 times by Arizona police officer Shipley for supposedly holding a pair of scissors. The list goes on. These indigenous injustices get swept under the rug, while those claiming to be empowered continue to turn a blind eye. We are thought of and treated as animals. The biggest mistake in that view is that all animals too are the brothers and sisters of man.
All right, y'all. All right. So, Jessa, if you have anything else that you want to say with regards to that, I'll go ahead and open it up to you. And then students, please unmute and let's begin a conversation.
Well, one thing you'll see me in there slamming a rock on this like stick licking figure. And what I'm doing is actually making a skirt. So the statement I was trying to make in that part was like, hey, even though you tried to keep us from our history and our culture and tradition, like we're bringing it back. And that's what I wanted to show between my regalia and the Mexica regalia, is that no matter how much they try to beat it out of us, we're still here fighting through this to keep and revive our culture and our ways of life. You know, yeah, we have to kind of, you'll see us in street clothes too. We have to kind of maneuver our ways into a society, but I'm grateful that people like John Trudell and, you know, our parents and certain grandparents who fought, you know, hard for us today to be able to have our culture and traditions to not publicize, but to have in a way that we don't have to hide anymore, you know.
Most definitely. I totally feel that, right? Because as we, spoke about in class last week, during the Spanish colonial period in Mexico, the indigenous people were enslaved, right? And then they were punished if they were caught practicing their indigenous traditions, whether it was religious, spiritual, their dance traditions, their music, their art, their writing, their forms of education, like everything was outlawed, everything was banned. And whoever was caught practicing that dealt with severe punishment. And that often led to death, right? So our ancestors had to really protect whatever was left in extreme secrecy. Like they had to be very underground about it. And so to have to live through that for 300 years of colonization, right? However they did that, so that it can come out on the other side. And now 500 years later, from the point of contact with the Spaniards, I get to be an Aztec dancer, and Jessa gets to be connected to her indigenous roots and culture, right? And like we said, we're trying to remember who we are, putting the pieces back together, putting the members back together, remembering genetically who we are, awakening our ancestral memory, right? And that's what we're trying to do, but just being so grateful every time that I get to hear those drums. I get to hear the rattles. I get to hear the songs. I get to hear the smell of copal and the smell of sage. I get to put something on, right? That would look similar to what my grandmothers from 500 years ago might have worn. That's a blessing. That is a huge gift. And that would not have happened without the sacrifices of our ancestors. And that's why I'm so passionate about helping you all tap into your ancestral memory, right? Because like Jessa said, it's so detrimental when there's this erasure of our identities and our histories that happen, right? Where we don't even realize that we're also indigenous, right? That yes, we're mixed, we're mestizos, we're Spanish, and we're indigenous, and we're all kinds of stuff. But if we don't remember what all those pieces are, then we're really missing out on who we are as a whole person.
Yeah.
Okay.
And to tie it back into the beginning, you know, sitting in that solitude is a good way to connect and to remember, you know, and being around the drum and being around the clapper sticks and being around, you know, those little bits of culture, you'll feel something that's drawing you to that. What is that little feeling? Well, that's also the genetic memory, that there's something inside of you that's remembering, you know. And I just want to share one hook. I won't sing the whole song, but something for you guys to look at. And it says, you don't define me by what you say. Ancestors stand behind me, so I'll be brave. The pain you inflict is temporary. The evil in your eyes, no, it doesn't scare me. You don't scare me. The ancestors showed me the truth. You don't scare me, and I know that that scares you. You don't define me by what you say. Ancestors stand behind me, so I'll be brave. So y'all could check that on another note, but that's that reminder of like our ancestors are with us on this journey. And if and when you have questions, ask the questions, sit in silence, and the answers will come. And you'll be like, what the heck was that? I don't know if I should believe it, but that's the answer you were asking the question to. That's your connection to yourself and your ancestors and your truth.
Thank you for that. All right, y'all, let's hear your voices. Does anyone have any questions or comments that you'd like to share? Brittany, can you unmute? Where did you experience this or see this? Tell us more.
Hi, I'm not sure. I learned about it actually in my women's study class. The professor, Kinkilla, his wife, she taught the class, but she also taught a Native American like history class, basically like learning about all of those traditions and stuff. And we were talking about basically like this whole tribe that had to do rituals into having a woman, you know, or having a girl become a woman. And that was during the time when I know that they weren't allowed to like celebrate anything. So they started doing it on the 4th of July because they knew that this would be a day when people wouldn't be paying attention to them. And a lot of it was like inside, and then usually, and it's like an all day thing. Like it's like the person has to go through like a lot of stuff. It's like a full 24 hours. And I know that like at the very end of the night, they have like a big bonfire and stuff. And they knew that they could do it on that day and people wouldn't question it. But that's kind of what I thought of when you were talking about how people really had to hide their traditions and cultures, but still try to keep them, you know, alive and well.
They had to find creative ways to resist, right? Creative ways to resist, most definitely. And just like, you know, my own ancestors, there's a lot of hidden Mexica or Nahuatl spirituality in the Mexican version of Catholicism. And if you are indigenous and follow those ways, you'll be able to identify them. But for your quote unquote regular Mexican who doesn't really follow indigenous ways, they wouldn't really be able to identify them necessarily, but indigenous folks can. It's like, oh, that really means this, right? And so one example of that would be like the conchero tradition, which ended up, because our drums were outlawed, right? Our drums were outlawed back then. And so they ended up using this like a European inspired string instrument called the concha. And so instead of pounding on the drum, dun 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 dun, dun, they would go tring 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 tring. So they would just kind of, you know, transfer the drum beat onto this European inspired, you know, and then they would sing their alabanzas in church, but the coded messages behind it were still very much tied to Nawa spiritual philosophy. So everything was encoded, right? So under the eyes of the Spaniards, it was like, oh, good, we're converting them. And they did convert a whole lot of them eventually, right? But then there were some that kept that tradition and understood the codes. And then they just kept moving those codes from generation to generation until it was eventually safe enough to expose the codes, right? And so now we can pair them up and say, oh, that's what it was all along. Makes sense, right? And so now we can decolonize that and practice it in the original form, in the pre-colonial form. So it's very interesting, like how creative, you know, they had to be to resist and to survive those time periods. Most definitely. Anybody else have any comments or questions for Jessa? Don't be shy now. What's on your mind, folks? Y'all mighty silent. I'm gonna ask you all, like, I do want to hear from someone, like, how does this resonate with you if your family lineage is somehow and somewhere indigenous, right? So we've been talking about exploring our indigeneity as Chicanas and Chicanos, right? As those of Mexican descent or even Central American, etc. How does this speak to you in your journey of self-discovery? And if that is not your background, right? If that is not your background, how does this fall on your ears? Like, how are you interpreting this? How is this helping you on your learning journey of self and others, right? So anyone just speak up, like, how is this sitting on you? Go ahead.
Sorry, I thought it was pretty fascinating. Just, yeah, the concept of getting to know your heritage and all that.
How does that play a role in your life?
I'm not sure, but I'll figure it out. I hope.
Okay. Is it making you want to dig a little deeper?
Yes.
Great. Anyone else?
I'll speak. The songs were really cool because they made like history a bit more like accessible to people and made it so something that people could enjoy at a surface level, but also get a deeper meaning out of. So I thought that was cool.
Thank you, Max. What do you make of all the information that is landing on your plate right now? Like, how is that helping you kind of figure out your place in history?
I don't really know what you mean, to be honest.
So this is a question for everyone, right? So everything that we're learning, just like I post to you every time on your papers, like, how does this apply to you? How does this affect you in your life, right? And whatever it is we're learning, whether it's a shift in consciousness, whether it's wanting to learn about it more so that you can understand your positionality in today's social structure versus anybody else's position in today's social structure. Just, you know, like this reflection moment of like, all of these things that happen in history have positioned us in certain places in the social structure that we're living in today, right? Whether that's good for you or maybe not so good for you. And then how does that play out in the relationships of like how you see each other, how you see yourself in relationship to other people, right? This is a question for everyone.
I'll speak. You know, it's really interesting because like it was cool that Jessa was telling us how you know, at a very early age, she was very spiritual, and that's something I think, besides like my mom being Catholic and going through the whole, I was raised very Mexican and with all the traditions of Catholicism. But deeper than that, I'm not very like spiritual. Like, I respect all that stuff, but I think it's because I don't really know much about my ancestry. Like besides like my grandparents, like before them, I don't know anything. So I don't know. It's kind of like it's kind of like a lost identity that I still have to figure out. And I'm 32, so it's like, when am I gonna really tap into that? So I guess I'm still trying to figure it out. That's what I'm trying to say.
Thank you, Max and Ernesto. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think a lot of us are in that place, right? We're just trying to figure it out right now, trying to make sense of all this new information. For sure, totally feel you. Anybody else?
I would say, oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you go ahead, please.
I was gonna say, I can relate to it, like a lot of trying to figure out who you are through music, because for me, music's a big part of me. And for me, I've always been into more, not so much like Mexican music, but more into like, I guess you'd say like rock and punk and stuff like that. But I've been able to find a community, especially here in like LA area, that really, I guess, is Chicano based.
How has that played a role in your life, Thomas or Tomas?
For me, like when I was younger, I didn't really consider myself like, I kind of felt like an outsider in the community because I was not into like what most Chicanos traditionally would be into. But finding a place like that I belong to, and other people who come from very like strict Mexican families and stuff like that, it's really helped me figure out who I guess I am, I guess.
All right, thank you for sharing. Ricardo, you wanted to say something?
Right. It was going to be something in similar vein to the use of spirituality and music for expression and defining. Sorry if there's a really big echo in the background too. But I think it's very interesting because right now I'm taking a Mixtec course through CI as well. And it's very interesting because I'm receiving some exposure of a lot of contemporary Mixtec and Zapotec artists from Mexico itself, principally in the area of San Miguel de Allende. And it's very interesting because similar in your mission, Jessa, of integrating values of your own indigenous traditions and making that more publicized and accessible to the public. I think it's very interesting that there are other artists too garnering more limelight in Mexico, doing similar work, and I thought that was very interesting because I guess that reflects in my life because now I'm seeing double exposure now. I'm seeing your work and I'm also seeing this other gentleman's work from another class. So I think it's very interesting that, it's an ongoing thing.
And Ricardo, I'm going to ask you what I'm asking everybody else, like how does that learning play a role in understanding yourself and your position in society more?
I guess from the perspective of experiencing education from the Mixtec approach, because in that class the professor doesn't have a lot of written material, just because I guess she was describing how in the old world letters were defined by objective meanings and sounds that they pronounced and produced. She was really conveying the material in a more oral tradition, and I think this is what satisfies that similar kind of approach, how they convey the message in that oral tradition. Does that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Does that help you understand yourself better?
Oh yeah, so that's the part. So understanding my own identity, yeah, it definitely helps me understand and help me kind of, I guess, gather different elements to help generate my own identity, because in this course we're talking about a bit about our own identity and connection to the land, and knowing whose land we're on, and trying to figure out what land we're coming from. Just because I think it was mentioned that there are different languages in Mexico that are completely distinct from each other, but doesn't necessarily mean that we're all separated. We're all connected, you know?
Got you. Okay. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
I'll go ahead and add. So I think you mentioned something about being able to heal generations past and present. And that for me, that like really opened my eyes during the guest speaker as well. It just shows me like, while learning about yourself, you can also help future generations kind of like clear up any confusion or like any misunderstandings, and like help like reveal the truth about like our own ancestors. I just think that that quote of being able to heal past and future generations is like the biggest thing from today's class.
Thank you. And so that, I think that was pretty clear example of how it's helping you in your own discovery of self. So thank you. Anyone else?
I'm not sure if I'm Indigenous, but this video, like, I really appreciate it because it helped me unlearn some things that the K through 12 education system really tries to hide about Indigenous people and their traditions and such. So I'm really grateful I just got to watch it.
So whether or not you're Indigenous, how does learning this help you understand yourself better?
I'm not sure. I've like promised myself, that's a hard question.
It is. It's meant to be hard. So I get it. And some of us need a little bit more time to like really think about that. And that's okay, y'all. That's okay. But I'm here to challenge you, right? That's my job. And, you know, we'll keep asking, we'll keep revisiting this as the semester continues, right? Because this is about self-discovery for everyone, whoever you might be and whatever your background might be and whatever your ethnicity might be. Because I think that throughout history, everyone has had a loss of identity and culture in some form or another, right? Everyone, whether whether your ancestors were the colonized or whether your ancestors were the colonizers, even then, both groups lost a lot of their own humanity in the process and a lot of their own culture and identity in the process, right? So as humans, we're all struggling to find out who we really truly are, right? And who we were truly meant to be in this world, right? And again, I bring it back to, we get so caught up in the modern pressures of going, right? And trying to get this career that pays you the money. And then it becomes about chasing that mighty dollar, that we get lost in that. And I'm not saying don't go get the money that you need and deserve to be able to take care of yourself and your family. What I'm saying is don't get so caught up in it that you forget yourself, your true self, right? Because I think that everyone, you know, is at risk of that, everyone. I just want to take this time, Jessa, to thank you. I know we're like, oh, we'll see 20 minutes and we'll see how it goes. And then it ended up being the whole class session, but that's cool. That's dope. You know, I just appreciate your time, sister. I appreciate your talent. I appreciate your passion and your dedication to this movement, right? Of intergenerational healing. I really just appreciate, you know, you as a human being and all the medicines that you bring to our circles, right? And all the healing that you bring as well. And especially for taking the time out of your day to be here with us and to share, you know, from your deepest, you know, thoughts and sentiments, that you opened yourself up to share like that. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here amongst you all. And I just want to add one more thing is, you know, I don't want any of us to beat ourselves up over what we don't know of our past or what we might never learn about our past, but really ask ourselves the question of, why am I here now? What am I here to learn now? Because we're all spiritual beings in this physical shell. And some of us might have been European in our past lives, and some of us might have been African in our past lives, and some of us might have been Indigenous in our past lives. But why are we here now? what's our purpose from this point forward, you know? And for me, myself, it looks like being a good person, for helping people to heal and so on, you know? So identify with yourself in that matter, and just please don't beat yourself up for what you don't know about your past. I just wanted to throw that out there.
For sure, right? And we have the opportunity to try to learn what we can, and what we can't, ni modo, right? But we're here together to learn together and grow together. So let's use this time to do as much as we can, and then be okay with that. Okay, so thank you for those last words, hermana. I wish you well. Much love to you and your family. Please tell your little one and your parents that I say hello, much love, and hopefully this pandemic is over sooner rather than later, so that we can all come back together in ceremony and share in these traditions, because I miss that. I miss my medicine people. I miss my medicine circles. And it's hard to get through this without being connected to everyone. So I look forward to that day. And oh, those are gonna be big hugs. It's like, so I can't wait for that. But thank you. I'm gonna stick around for anyone who has questions, in case you did want to talk about anything, or you have questions about your papers, anything like that. I'll still be here. But for now, if you can please unmute yourselves and say thank you and goodbye to Jessa. If you're leaving, and if you're staying, go ahead and please stay. Okay, I'm gonna stick around for you. But bye, Jessa.
Thank you so
Much
much.
love.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
for taking the time to talk to us.
Definitely. Thank you. And thank you, hermana, for having me. Love to you and your daughter as well. And hopefully we will see you soon. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.